This holiday season, step into the world of Scrooge, A Christmas Carol, the award-winning audio drama podcast from Hope Media Group and Compassion International. Returning for its 2024 season, this classic tale of redemption and forgiveness is brought to life like never before. Whether you're gathered with family or listening solo, Scrooge is the perfect way to embrace the true meaning of Christmas. Feel the power of the season's spirit with a story of transformation and hope. Catch Scrooge, A Christmas Carol, wherever you listen to podcasts or tune in on ScroogePodcast.com. This year, let the story move you and remind you of the joy of forgiveness and the magic of Christmas.
This holiday season, give yourself or your loved one the gift of Organifi. I'm not kidding you. My favorite way to de-stress this Christmas and do something kind for myself has been so simple. It's pouring myself a warm mug of Organifi Gold at the end of my day. This delicious tea not only tastes so good, it is packed with powerful superfoods that help me sleep and recover so I can get a great night's sleep and wake up feeling refreshed and energized. No matter how stressful my day has been, just one scoop of Organifi Gold in a cup of warm almond milk and my whole body starts to untense. I can sink into a good book or a holiday movie. I'm winding down and I'm preparing my body for a great night's sleep. Organifi takes pride in offering the best tasting superfood products on the market at a price that works out to less than $3 a day. You can experience Organifi's high quality superfoods without breaking the bank. Head over to www.organifi.com/bestofyou and use code bestofyou for 20% off your entire order. That's ORGANIFI.com/bestofyou. Hey everyone, I'm Dr. Allison, and I'm so glad you're here to discover what brings out the best of you. This podcast is all about breaking free from painful patterns, mending the past, and discovering our true selves in God. I can't wait to get started as we learn together how to become the best version of who we are with God's help. Hey everyone, and welcome back to this week's episode of the Best of You podcast. I'm so glad you're here with me this week. Today, we are diving into a topic that touches every single one of us at some point in life, and that's grief. Whether you've experienced the loss of a loved one, a job, a relationship, maybe the loss of health, either your own health or the health of a loved one. There's so many different ways that we experience loss in this life, and it's so important to honor the role of grief as an inescapable part of the human experience. We know that Jesus experienced loss. He felt the pain of grief when he wept at the tomb of his friend Lazarus. Even though he knew he would raise Lazarus from the dead, he knew the end of that story, Jesus didn't bypass the pain of the moment. He fully entered into the sorrow and heartbreak of that moment as he mourned with those who loved Lazarus. He also grieved over the city of Jerusalem. He lamented its brokenness and resistance to God's love. And in the Garden of Gethsemane, Jesus also experienced deep anguish. He cried out to God in the face of his impending suffering. Again, Jesus knew what the end of these stories was going to be. He knew that all things work to good for those who love God. And yet he entered into these moments of grief, reminding us that grief is not something to avoid or minimize. Instead, it's a sacred part of being human, one that Jesus embraces with us as we're honest and transparent and open about what we feel. And because I know that the holidays, while they bring joy and anticipation and excitement, can also heighten a sense of grief, I wanted to find a way to honor that paradox. So very often, two things can be true. At the very moment that you feel the joy and hope of the holiday season, you can also get hijacked by a painful memory, maybe a memory of someone you've lost, of a place you've loved and haven't been able to visit for a long time, or maybe even a dream that feels buried or lost. And those feelings of grief or loss that surface sometimes unexpectedly can be hard to figure out how to navigate. And that's why I wanted to invite today's guest, David Kessler, on to talk with us through some practical ways he's found to help you navigate the very normal human experience of grief. David Kessler is one of the world's foremost experts on grief. He's met with the likes of Mother Teresa and worked with Elisabeth Kübler-Ross, and he's actually identified the sixth phase to expand upon Kübler-Ross's 5 stages of grief. He identifies meaning as that sixth stage, and he has a brand new workbook out called Finding Meaning, the Sixth Stage of Grief Workbook. Tools for Releasing Pain and Remembering with Love. And I went through the workbook myself, and it's such a great resource. I wanted to share it with you on the podcast today. Before we dive into the conversation, I want to take a moment to first touch on the foundational framework of grief created by Elisabeth Kübler-Ross, whose work deeply influenced David. These 5 stages aren't linear, as we'll talk about in today's episode, but they allow for different experiences and emotions that are closely related to the grieving process. And so you may notice yourself feeling any one of these things, and it's just can be so helpful to identify, oh, that's what's going on here. So here's a quick overview of those 5 stages of grief. Again, they're not linear. They don't go in any particular order, but they are very often linked to a process you may be experiencing as you think about a loss that you're grieving in your life. The first one is denial. This is just that initial shock or disbelief after a loss where you might struggle to accept the reality of what has happened. It's really natural and normal to just kind of go through a stage of shock or denial. I just don't know what to do with this, so I'm just going to deny it or avoid it. You might notice this in your body more as avoidance or just a refusal to process the events. It's like a part of you knows, okay, I think something really painful or really hard happened here, but other parts of you are just saying, no, we're not going there. We're not going to process this. This is really normal. It can be really helpful to just name, okay, whatever this thing is that I'm going through that's really hard, I just can't process it right now. This is a stage of grief that's normal, and it's called denial. Number 2, you might notice yourself feeling unusually angry, the stage of anger, as the reality of a loss sets in. And as you begin to process it internally, you might notice a part of you feeling angry. I can't believe this happened. Whose fault is this? I want to blame somebody. I want to believe that someone else could have prevented this. And this anger might be directed at someone else where you just are so angry that someone else let this happen. You're looking for someone to blame, but it can also be directed at yourself. You might just be so angry with yourself, either that you feel the way you feel, or you might blame yourself for what happened. And thirdly, you might be angry at God, and you just can't believe God let this painful thing happen. Again, anger is such a normal and necessary part of the grieving process. It's those frozen parts of you starting to wake up, right? Initially, maybe you felt that denial. You've been avoiding the painful feelings that are associated with grief. And anger is sometimes one of the ways those parts of us start to wake up and break through to the surface. They start looking for someone to blame, either yourself, God, or someone else. And if you can notice that and just give yourself space to feel that anger, it can really help you move through those emotions and get to the other side. And then number 3, you might notice yourself bargaining. This is where parts of you are trying to regain control. Those painful emotions are starting to show up, the anger. And so another part of you is starting to kind of bargain with God. You know, God, if I do this, would you do this? Or if only I had done this, maybe you would have done this. You're kind of trying to find a logic to your grief when you're bargaining, when so often there isn't a logic to the pain that you feel. But again, these are other parts of you that are beginning to wake up. They're beginning to try to make sense of what happened. And they think if you can bargain with God or with other people or even with yourself, you know, if I can be a better person, maybe I can avoid something like this in the future. And again, these are parts of you that are waking up. And so this is a necessary part of the process. You need to let yourself move through this bargaining, even as you're aware that this is just one part of the overall grieving process. And then number 4, the 4th stage is depression. This is where you begin to feel the sadness and the sorrow and just the emotional pain of what you've experienced. Again, this is a necessary part of the grieving process. It can feel overwhelming. And that's what those other parts of you, right? The anger and the denial and the bargaining, they're in many ways trying to protect you from just feeling this deep sadness, this deep sorrow inside your soul. And yet you won't be able to move through the grieving process if you don't also honor the sadness. And we talk a little bit in today's episode about how you can honor the sadness with the help of structure and with the help of gentle boundaries so that sadness can be felt without completely taking you over. And then number 5, you move into acceptance. And acceptance doesn't mean that you're okay with what happened. Instead, it means that all of these parts of you, right? The parts of you that are angry and the parts of you that want to take control through bargaining and the parts of you that are avoiding through denial and the parts of you that are just so sad reach a sort of truce. They reach a sort of harmony around the table of your soul. And you realize that all of those parts of you are valuable and that you're also finding your way through the pain and finding a way to move forward. And that is where this beautiful 6th stage that David has identified, the stage of meaning, can really come in to focus. And David describes this work of finding meaning so beautifully. It doesn't replace those other stages. It just begins to point to a new way forward that both honors your loss and also honors a new reality. And so this holiday season, I pray you'll find a way to honor each of these parts of you in partnership with God's Spirit. Our dogs love Sundays. I'm not kidding. One of our dogs was the slowest eater on earth for the first several years of her life. It was painful how long it would take her to eat. The minute we introduced her to Sundays, she just laps it up. She loves it. Sundays is healthy dog food that's easy to store and serve. Most foods are one or the other, but Sundays is both. It's fresh dog food made from a short list of human-grade ingredients that contains 90% meat, 10% superfoods, and 0% synthetic nutrients. But unlike other fresh dog food, it doesn't require refrigeration or preparation. It's air-dried, so you simply pour and serve. It's so easy. Get 40% off your first order of Sundays. Go to sundaysfordogs.com/bestofyou or use code bestofyou at checkout. I'm always working to stay hydrated. My family teases me because I always have some form of hydration nearby or in my hand. And having safe, clean water is the last thing I want to worry about. And that's why you've got to check out AquaTrue. AquaTrue purifiers use a 4-stage reverse osmosis purification process, and their countertop purifiers work with no installation or plumbing. They remove 15 times more contaminants than ordinary pitcher filters and are specifically designed to combat chemicals like PFAS in our water supply. Best of all, the water tastes fantastic. It's portable, making it perfect for renters or college dorms. And the filters are affordable and long-lasting. I never worry about drinking tap water anymore. I know my tap water is not just filtered with AquaTrue, it's purified. AquaTrue comes with a 30-day money-back guarantee and even makes a great gift. Today, my listeners receive 20% off any AquaTrue purifier. Just go to aquatrue.com, that's AQUATRU.com, and enter code BESTOFYOU at checkout. That's 20% off any AquaTrue water purifier when you go to aquatrue.com and use promo code BESTOFYOU.
This episode is brought to you by Amazon Prime. There's nothing sweeter than baking cookies during the holidays. With Prime, I get all my ingredients delivered right to my door, fast and free, no last-minute store trips needed. And of course, I blast my favorite holiday playlist on Amazon Music. It's the ultimate soundtrack for creating unforgettable memories. From streaming to shopping, it's on Prime. Visit Amazon.com/Prime to get more out of whatever you're into.
David Kessler is one of the world's foremost experts on grief and loss. He has authored multiple influential books on grief, including On Grief and Grieving and Life Lessons, both of which he co-authored with Elisabeth Kübler-Ross, and The Needs of the Dying, a book praised by Mother Teresa. His book, Finding Meaning, is an incredible exploration of what David identifies as the sixth stage of grief, and he recently released his highly anticipated Finding Meaning workbook, which provides tools for releasing pain and remembering with love. This workbook is a beautiful resource, and David has such an incredible story. He has really lived what he teaches. I'm thrilled to bring you my conversation with David Kessler. This is such a timely topic with so much going on in our world, David. So thank you so much for being here to talk with us about grief and about finding meaning. What does that mean in particular? Thank you so much.
Absolutely. I'm so excited to be with you. So thank you for having me.
Your work on grief is so groundbreaking, and I really want to get into the sixth phase that you've identified. I'm curious if you'd be willing to share with my listeners what drew you to this work. How does it grow out of your own personal experiences?
Well, I will tell you, I had a challenging childhood with lots of dysfunction. I hold my parents very dear in my heart. They were wounded. They didn't have the resources we do today to help heal. So I learned early on that loss takes many forms. You can feel the loss of a safety. You can feel even the loss of your childhood. Then when I was 13, my mother was very sick, went into a hospital hours away. And when she was dying, we were at the hotel across the street. A fire broke out. People started yelling fire. They evacuated. We all ran out. And on the 18th floor, there was flames coming out of the hotel. The fire trucks pulled up. I was finding it a little exciting at this point because I had been this bored teenager. And then all of a sudden, shooting began.
Oh my gosh.
And they realized this wasn't just a fire, but also an active shooter. It went on for hours. It was one of the first mass shootings in the U.S. So my father got us out, went across back to the hospital, and in a couple of days, my mother died, wasn't allowed to be with her. She was in the ICU. And I knew at such a young age, there was a better way. The only advice I got was from a stranger in the staircase who said, be strong, which can feel like don't have feelings and take care of everyone else. The grief was never really mentioned again. And I'll tell you, between my childhood, and I grew up down south, so I dealt with hurricanes and loss and the trauma of these events, I thought I was just broken for life. And it wasn't till I got to community college that I realized, oh my gosh, there's a language for this. I took a class and studied this woman, Elisabeth Kübler-Ross, who had written about these stages, denial, anger, bargaining, depression, acceptance. Little did I know I would go on to work with her and learn from her and write 2 books with her. And I always hear her whispering in my ear, tell them the stages aren't linear. There's no one right way to do this. That grief is an organic process. I always say we come from a long line of dead people. All our ancestors have died. We know how to do this. It's our society that tells us often we're doing it wrong. So that's what initially got into me to sort of really help with my work.
I love that. Thank you so much for giving us that backdrop. How did you begin to develop this idea for the sixth stage? And I love your caveat. I find myself, I'd never met her, but I find myself also wanting to give that caveat every time I talk about the 5 stages of grief. They're not linear. So I love that you said that. And then somehow you begin to recognize this need for a sixth, assuming also not linear, but another really important piece of the grieving process. Tell us a little bit about how that began to emerge for you.
I will tell you, I have had this amazing, tremendous career of being of service to others and helping, and it has been my privilege. And I got to be with Mother Teresa and spend time with her in her home in Calcutta for the dying destitute. I've worked in a hospital system and was, privileged to not only work and oversee the end of life care and hospice, but also the clergy there and to work with them and see how our faith comes into this and how we can live our lives fully, even with the tragedies we had. I thought I was to be of service and help others, and I did that for decades. And I thought my personal grief was behind me. And it wasn't till out of the blue, my younger son at 21 years old died unexpectedly. It was brutal. First of all, I was on the floor. I did not think I would get up. And I had to take my own medicine and go to a grief counselor and go to a grief group and sit like in a group with a baseball cap on, a group of bereaved parents, and literally my books were on a table 5 feet away, and I couldn't tell anyone that was me. I couldn't be the grief expert. I had to be the father that buried a child. I would also see myself going through the process. Denial. Yep. Oh, I can't believe my son is gone. Anger. I was so angry. Angry at life, angry at my son, angry at God. Like, wait, I had tried to be of service and help people. Why me? Why would you do that? I had to really go there. And of course, with time, I eventually realized, number one, I knew my God was big enough to handle my anger. I knew that I had seen people go through all these different places in their grief and that there was life on the other end for them. I wasn't sure how I would find it. I saw myself going through depression and bargaining, which is the guilt. And also, then I began to wrestle that, I'm going to have to accept this someday. And I will tell you, that idea of accepting it was just not enough. I thought there has to be more. And so I remember that I had read Viktor Frankl's work on meaning, and I didn't quite understand how meaning and grief sort of played together, because so many times people would sort of trip over, there's no meaning in a horrible death. There's no meaning in all these tragedies we have in our lives, in breakup, divorce, betrayal, tragedy, murder, all these horrible things that happen to us. And what I realized is that meaning isn't in the horrible event. Meaning is in us. It's what we do later, what we do after. And so it didn't take away my pain, but it gave me a cushion. And I was so honored that the Elisabeth Kübler-Ross family gave me a permission to add a 6th stage to her iconic stages, because I think we're a generation that wants more, and that's meaning.
I love how you just said that. That is powerful. The meaning is not in the horrible set of circumstances. It's in what you do on the other side of that horrible event. That's so powerful, especially for people of faith. There's sort of a ditch on both sides of the road of meaning. If you too quickly go to, well, God has a reason for it, that's not honoring the grief. But the other side of it is there's no meaning whatsoever, can feel, to your point, very empty, like not enough. And I love how you've articulated that for us. I think that's beautiful.
Well, I think we have to hold the divine and we have to hold the human experience.
Yeah.
I will tell you, I have a friend who writes books on religion, just an amazing person, called me 2 months in maybe and said, "How are you doing today?" And I said, "I am so angry." And she heard and she said to me, "I hear the anger. I hear the anger." She said, "Would you like to talk about the spiritual aspects of this or the human aspects?" And I said, "Both, and start with the human." And so she listened to me in my anger And she said to me, I'm surprised you're not breaking furniture. And I thought, oh my gosh, she sees me. She sees I could take my couch, my sofa, and snap it in half. She sees my anger. And she heard me, and she understood. I always say anger is pain's bodyguard. She helped me release that pain, that anger, in a safe way, in a safe place. And then after she listened so lovingly and patiently, she said, are you ready to talk about the spiritual? And I said, yes. And she goes, your son David can't die. That was his body, but he can't die. He's eternal. And so, just like you mentioned, I think sometimes we can almost try to bypass the human experience and go right to the spiritual and go, oh, he's always with you. And, he's in a better place. And we're feeling like, I know that, but I want him here with me.
Yes, that's so powerful. And I love that she asked you that question. That's such a powerful thing for listeners to hear. Like, do you want the human right now? Do you want to just be human, or do you want the spiritual? And it might be a different answer on different days.
Absolutely. And if I meet, with my minister, I might be looking for the spiritual. That might be the context I'm looking for. And other times, we're just in our human experience.
Yeah, that's so powerful. What would you say, David, for people who feel stuck in an earlier stage, right? Maybe they can't kind of come out of the anger, the denial, to even get to contemplating meaning. What would you say to folks?
There is a reason. Maybe you're not supported in your life. Maybe it's not safe enough. There's people around us who say, just get over it, move on. And I tell people, and grief takes many forms. It can be the loss of a job. It can be a relationship loss. It can be a pet loss. I mean, there's so many different losses in our life. But people can easily say, just get over it. Well, it's often not a cold or a flu that we just recover from. We have to walk through it. And so you might not be supported enough. I have online groups. We have 26 different groups because grief is a unique time that your best friend, maybe your spouse, maybe your sister, your brother, that person who gets you, is always there for you, doesn't understand this one. And grief is a time when family and friends can feel like strangers, and strangers can become family and friends. So sometimes we need, if our family doesn't get it, we need to go outside. We need to go to a local group or an online group. We need that. That can help us get stuck if we don't have that support, that community. The other thing is, it's so important to understand what stuck means. For example, I think of on this side of the continuum is stuck. Over here is chaos. Chaos is too much change. We were thrown into too much change with this loss. And so we bounce all the way into stuck because stuck can feel safe.
Oh, that's so good. What you're saying reminds me that stuck might be where you need to be for that moment. It reminds me in the IFS model that we talk about sometimes on the podcast, that part of you is there for a reason, to your point.
That part might be saying, no more change.
Yeah.
Even when we're saying, but walk forward into your new life, and it's a different life, but you're still here, that part might be saying, no more change. I've had enough. And I'll tell you, we live in a grief illiterate world, as you know. It's interesting. I have a grief certificate program that we train therapists and clergy and so many coaches, and even amazing clergy who are in our programs will say, I got trained on how to visit the sick. I got trained on how to do the funeral. no one taught me how to do the long walk with someone through their grief.
That is so true. We live in a grief illiterate world. And to your point, what you said earlier, that grief is not the problem. The problem is living in a culture that doesn't create spaces for it. Have you thought about giving yourself a gift this holiday season? How about the gift of language, something that helps you grow, learn, and become an even better version of yourself? With Babbel, it's all possible. Maybe you have a loved one whose native language isn't English. Imagine the look on their face when you surprise them by speaking their language this holiday season. I know that I lived in Germany for a semester in college, and I spoke German during that time, but I've almost completely lost it. And with my niece coming home from Germany to spend time with us this Christmas, I can't wait to brush up so that we can have an actual conversation in German. What a fun gift for the holidays. With quick 10-minute lessons handcrafted by over 200 language experts, Babbel gets you speaking a new language in just 3 weeks. Babbel's focus is real-life conversation, not academic jargon or expensive tutors. Studies from Yale and Michigan State prove it works. Here's a special holiday deal for our listeners. Right now, get up to 60% off your Babbel subscription, but only for our listeners at babbel.com/bestofyou. Get up to 60% off at babbel.com/bestofyou. That's BABBEL.com/bestofyou. Rules and restrictions may apply. This show is sponsored by BetterHelp. The holidays are my favorite time of the year. There's nothing better than curling up under a cozy blanket, sipping a hot beverage, and spending time with family. But while December can feel warm and cozy and even magical at times, it can also be overwhelming with all the demands and emotions of the season. That's why I think about comfort that lasts, like the kind that therapy can bring. Therapy isn't just for navigating major challenges. It's a way to learn positive coping skills, set healthy boundaries, and become the best version of yourself no matter the season. If you're thinking about starting therapy, consider trying BetterHelp. It's entirely online, designed to fit into your schedule, and so easy to get started. You just fill out a quick questionnaire to get matched with a licensed therapist, and you can switch therapists anytime at no additional cost. Find comfort this December with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/bestofyou today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/bestofyou.
When your gut feels off, your whole day can feel off. Activia probiotic yogurts and dailies are a quick, easy, and tasty way to up your gut health game every day. They're deliciously smooth and creamy and packed with billions of live and active probiotics. Your gut is where it all begins, so start with Activia. Enjoying Activia twice a day for 2 weeks as part of a balanced diet and healthy lifestyle can help reduce the frequency of minor digestive discomfort.
Tell me a little bit more about this workbook that you have out now, David. It really focuses on the meaning part. What are some of the practical ways you walk someone through this journey of grief, which includes this piece of creating meaning? Again, not necessarily finding meaning in something tragic, but finding meaning in that journey. How do you begin to walk people through that?
Well, I almost feel like if I could go back and change the title, I might, because in a lot of ways, the workbook is really about excavating the pain. And when you excavate the pain, the meaning gets revealed. But we have to go through the pain. And I started the workbook. By the way, I wanted the workbook because people had gotten the original book, and you can start with the workbook. You don't have to go back to any of the other books. It starts with telling our stories and realizing there's a way we tell our stories. But then I have the feeling wheel. And here's the thing. We can't heal what we don't feel. And we often think we have 3 feelings: I'm happy, mad, or sad. That's it. And people get to choose all these feelings to see and to understand. Number one, we have judgment on our feelings. And I do a lot of work in there in uncovering the judgment. Now, when I say to people, you have judgment on your feelings or grief, they're like, no, I don't. But they'll go, I'm not crying enough. I'm crying too much. And I go, well, those are actually judgments. Or they'll go, I should be further along. Oof, that's a judgment. and to sort of understand we're the first generation that has the luxury of feelings on feelings. We'll go, I'm angry, but anger is inappropriate. I'm sad, but there's worse things in the world. And we have all these feelings that we sort of half feel and throw behind us. People say to me, if I start crying, I'll never stop. And I'll say, oh, dear one, I've sat with thousands of people. Everyone stops crying. We might cry again, but everyone stops crying. These feelings just want to be felt, and feelings are not facts. They're just information. They want to be felt, and then we go to the next feeling. One of the tricks our mind plays with us that's so cruel is our mind will make us feel like this feeling is final. You're devastated, but that's the rest of your life. You're brokenhearted forever. You're lonely always. And those may not be true.
Do you think, David, that community or groups are essential for that kind of grief work, that part of it of feeling the feelings? Or can somebody do that in the privacy of their own journal and the privacy of their own prayer life? I'm curious about that because I also think sometimes people are nervous about exposing raw feelings to other people.
Well, that's one of my purposes in doing this because, like I said, I wanted it to feel like we're at your kitchen table. And I make a joke about I have an amazing co-author on this book. It's the person who sits down with it. And they get to put their thoughts, their feelings, their heartbreak down on paper, and they get to experience it. And they get to witness their own grief and see their pain. And it helps us feel less alone.
Yeah. I love that. This could actually be sort of one of your companions, just this place that you've created where there's some structure to it, where there's a sense of there's somebody who knows what they're doing, who's laid this out for me that can kind of help those parts of you that are nervous. If I go there, I never will come back. No, I can do 2 pages today.
There's some big open-ended questions in there. But there's like a disloyalty checklist that you could sit down in 2 minutes and go, oh, I didn't realize that. There's a place you could mark. Do I have shame in my grief? There's just some really easy exercises for someone who's like, oh, I'm afraid to open that book. And I'll tell you, Allison, here's one of the challenges. Someone said to me, I bought the workbook, but I'm not ready to open it. And I said, okay. I'm just curious, can you tell me more about that? And she said, yes, I don't want to open the pain. And I said to her, oh, if only you could skip the pain by not opening the book. If only you could put that workbook in the closet on a shelf with your pain. You can never open the workbook, but the pain is not in the workbook. It's in you. The workbook is a way to move the pain from you out.
That's so well stated. We kind of treat it like a little box. So then, David, once we begin to do that, open the pain in ourselves through these questions, through excavating the pain, what's the alchemy? How does that process work that meaning begins to flow from that in your experience? Is it just something that begins to start to take shape through looking at the pain?
Well, if I can, there's just a few guidelines in there to sort of help us think about it.
Please.
There's 7 of them. Meaning is relative and personal. 2, meaning takes time. You may not find it for months or years after a loss. 3, meaning doesn't require understanding. It isn't necessary to understand why someone died in order to find the meaning. So many times we get stuck in the why. I need a why to find my healing, to move through this grief. There's so many times in life there just isn't a why. And there's many times we end up getting a why. Maybe the doctor tells us why they died, what happened to their body. And I tell people, even when you get a why, it's not a satisfying why. So we don't need the why to find the meaning. And 4, even when you do find your meaning, it won't be worth the cost. We'd always rather have our loved one back. There is no, I could become the greatest bestseller of all times, and I'd rather have my son back. 5, and this is an important one, your loss is not a test, a lesson, something to handle, a gift, or a blessing. Loss is what happens in life. Meaning is what you make happen after the loss. And 6, only you can find your own meaning. And 7, meaningful connections will heal painful memories. And just that idea, and I think it's challenging, and I think people can easily get lost in that 5th one. It's not a lesson, it's not a blessing, it's not these things. So many times, like someone said to me, David, our family is cursed. And I said, oh my gosh, tell me why. Oh, the grandparents have all died. There was a cousin. We've had so many deaths. And I said, do you know what the death rate is in your family compared to others? And she's like, oh, I'm sure we're high. What is the death rate in families? And I said, 100%. On planet Earth, it has been designed, as far as I can see, that everyone who lives dies someday. And when we can recognize that's the mystery and the way this world is set up, and be present in that and not fight with the reality, we can find a different life.
It's a paradox, isn't it?
It is a paradox.
That there's life in making peace with the reality of death.
And it's a strange thing. I live in a really sweet, cute little neighborhood. And I ran into someone that I hadn't seen. We worked together 30 years ago. And here she lives fairly close. And she goes, oh, I've been following your work over the year and your career and all that. And she goes, I'd like to be friends, but it would just be too depressing. And I said to her, that's okay. But just so you know, I don't have a depressed life.
Yeah.
I have a really full life. And I think here's where it's hard to understand that. Most of my work now is online, but back in the day when I would go to a hotel meeting room that had a few hundred people, I'd be teaching. Down the hall would be the realtors. Around the corner would be the nurses. Then there'd be the Rotary Club. After the day was over, the staff would say, hey, what were you teaching? And I'd go, oh, why do you ask? And they go, because your group was laughing the most. And they'd go, wait a minute, I don't understand. What were you teaching? And I'd go, grief. And they're like, now we're really confused. Here's what people don't understand. Everyone in that room who had been through loss, many were now helpers, learning how to continue to help people. They absolutely had to go deeper into their pain. But what we don't realize is their bandwidth was also expanded for joy. They laughed a little harder. We understand, I know now the most precious thing we have is our time. And, when we hear this idea of meaning, we think, oh, is it a charity I'm supposed to start? What am I supposed to do? And I tell people, meaning can be in those big events, but meaning is also in the small moments. We have to name it. Allison, this is a meaningful moment.
Yeah, I feel it.
Someone might be listening that needs to hear this, or have someone they know that needs to hear this, to just name those moments of meaning.
I love that. I feel that. That's beautiful. Thank you so much for what you've done here. I have 2 questions for you, David. I like to ask all my guests. The first one is, if you could go back and say something to that young boy in the hotel room, what would you want him to know now?
You're going to be okay. You're going to get through this. You're going to be okay.
Yeah, I love that. And what's bringing out the best of you right now?
Walking with people through these tough times to help them find the light again.
That's beautiful. You're helping a lot of people. Tell us where we can find more about your work, the workbook, and all that you're doing to help people journey through grief.
Sure. If you go to grief.com, You can find information on the workbook, all my books, as well as my Tender Hearts online grief program and the Grief Educator Certificate program, and lots of just free resources.
Yeah, it's really amazing. You're shining your light for so many people in, as you said, in a world that doesn't always honor the genuineness of this process, and that it's something we all have to do on some level, and it's normal, and it doesn't mean it's easy. But I just so appreciate all that you're doing to help so many people. And I so appreciate your time coming on here today.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you for joining me for this week's episode of The Best of You. It would mean so much if you take a moment to subscribe. You can go to Apple, Spotify, Amazon Music, or wherever you listen to podcasts and click the plus or follow button. That will ensure you don't miss an episode, and it helps get the word out to others. While you're there, I'd love it if you leave your 5-star review. I look forward to seeing you back here next Thursday. And remember, as you become the best of who you are, you honor God, you heal others, and you stay true to your God-given self.
Hey, I'm Greer, host of the Unfinished Idea podcast, where listeners and I get to journey together to better understand the neurodiverse world. Together with my husband, we have 2 boys and 2 dogs and raising a child with additional needs. Our day-to-day experience isn't being talked about in everyday life, and I see a gap in those leading people who are neurodivergent. Whether you're a parent, a friend, a teacher, or a neighbor, the neurodivergent world is all around us. So this podcast is for you. I have conversations over a cup of tea or coffee, helping to bring awareness about how neurodivergent people experience the world, as well as families who are raising children with different needs. This podcast will share practical help, tips, and the joys, struggles, and differences in being neurodivergent or raising a child who is. Each week, I will spend 30 minutes talking and interviewing others in the neurodiverse space and giving you the opportunity to learn and grow and feel seen and heard by how we interact with each other and the world. Search for The Unfinished Idea in your favorite podcast app and come learn about the neurodivergent world. I'm looking forward to seeing you there.